Greetings YouTube, the author Mark Simmons here, back for a third instalment of my readings from the Psionic Powers Trilogy. In this episode I'll be reading a snippet from chapter 4 of my debut novel of the night, this one. In the story so far, our protagonist has recently been made immortal. Don't mention the V word. And he and his creator have been caught outside as the sun's coming up, basically. So they have had to retreat to the sewers, which is where the story, where we'll pick up what I'm reading. Of the Night is available through Poe Boy Publishing on Amazon. Links are in the description. And as always, I've not rehearsed this, so let's see how it goes. So this is chapter 4 from Of the Night, and it is called Underneath. Whilst studying her face, he saw her eyes were fixed on something up ahead, a puzzled expression clearly present, so he followed her line of sight to see what had her so spooked. Up ahead, the tunnel thinned as it rose at a gradual incline. It must have been near the surface as sunlight broke down across the passageway. Kadir stared at the glow of summer as it cooked down through a storm drain. Their next move must have been on her thoughts as she chewed on her lower lip. Whitfield was sceptical of her feared look, as the light was broken and shadowed in many places. They should be able to walk past it with relative ease. What's with the pout? She turned and looked at him as if she were seeing him for the first time. There are plenty of shadows up there for us to use. So sure was he that he marched up the slope. As he reached the crescent of the small hill, Kadir's worries became his worries too. Multiple shards of light changed at unnatural angles, the beams spinning through the darkness in a way that defied the laws of physics. They paused for a few seconds before whirling at a different set of impossible angles before coming to a standstill. We have reached the edge of one of the parks, Kadir answered. Kadir answered the question he was just about to pose as she joined him. This is a sun trap. Am I supposed to know what that is? It's a very clever use of mirrors and light. As she spoke, the lights changed position again, stopping in a number of different implausible positions. They collect sunlight directly from the source and reflect it down into a series of mirrors. These run on timers that randomly adjust every 6 seconds. Sounds technical, Whitfield replied, watching the lights move once more. Not really. The tall woman shrugged as if she was simply disregarding his words. The mirror system is no different from what you would find inside the average disco lighting, with someone upstairs manning its movement all day. It's a useful tool for keeping our kind out of the parks during the day. Who's upstairs manning it? Whitfield asked, taking a step closer to the light show. Not our kind. Whitfield turned and began to look around to see if there was any way around the intermittent laser display. A walkway led along the right side of the tunnel, but that part of the wall seemed to get the most concentration of beams. Well, just how dangerous is it? He asked. I mean, could we not just jump through the beams? Kadir answered his question with one quick motion. With baffling speed, she took hold of a single strand of his hair, swiped her blade and removed the lock from his scalp. Before he could complain, she threw the hair into the crisscross of light. It sparked upon impact and was soon nothing more than a few specks of ash floating down through the various rays. I guess no would be the answer to my question. He knelt down on the floor and looked at the water that dominated the whole left side of the tunnel and then glanced back down the hill. This is a dam, he said to himself at first, but the tall woman grunted in agreement and studied him, waiting for his next words. So in theory, the water along this corridor should be quite deep. All we need to do is swim along the bottom and glide right under the disco ball of death. Kadir looked at him like he had just insulted her heritage. What do you mean we? Before he could answer, she pushed him into the water with her foot. He managed to land on his belly, skidding along the surface, and as he stood up in the water, he turned to her with a look of disbelief. "We'll get going," she barked, dismissively waving him away. Shaking his head, he waded through to the edge of the light show. Taking deep breaths to ready himself for a prolonged period underwater, he was transported back to the Alborian Sea. His friends would all go diving off the rocks. Childhood came flooding back. Entire summers spent lazing by the water's edge, not a care in the world. Their favourite game had been throwing various objects they would find on the shoreline to the bottom of the bay and seeing who could retrieve them. It didn't matter what the item was or how heavy it was, but only that you were able to find it and pull it back to the surface. Whitfield had by no means been the best at it, but neither was he the worst. As he looked down at the filth he was about to plunge into, he wished that the waters were the blues he remembered from his youth. With resignation, he gave one final inhalation and dove forward into the brown liquid. Whitfield pushed forward, and his outstretched hands instantly locked into a barrier. Instinctively he opened his eyes and immediately wished he hadn't. He couldn't see a thing, and as his body disturbed the particles in the water, they all seemed to be drawn to his eyeballs. Shards of what he imagined to be wood dragged across them. He forced his eyes shut again and decided to change his method of sensing. At first, all he could feel was the layers of slime, but as he delved deeper into the funk, he began to make out shapes. His fingers slid between the thin bars of some kind of wire mesh. His hands moved along the crisscrossed metal until they came to an extremity. Its surface also metal, but at its end what felt like hard rubber. As his hand stroked over the next texture, it moved, and a mild squeak sounded through the water. As his hands explored further, the shape of a shopping trolley formed in his mind, and with more effort than his lungs could afford, he worked his way around it. Open space ahead allowed him to get more strokes together, and he soon propelled forward. As he progressed, the burning in his lungs began to increase, the beginnings of mild panic starting to grow as oxygen in him decreased. A low humming sound took his mind off the panic as he wondered what was causing it. When he reached what he thought was the source of the sound, he tried again to open his eyes. Unlike last time, floating debris didn't block his vision, but instead he could see quite clearly the bottom of the canal and the filter that was helping to clear the water. Through the clarity, a different issue presented itself as a beam of light carved a path through not so murky water straight towards him. Whitfield's first instinct was to breathe in. Water came flooding into his mouth and lungs. His second instinct was to try and push away from the approaching peril, whilst also resisting the urge to push up to the surface. Yet was the surface any better option? He tried to get out of the way, but the water slowed his movements, and as the beam came to within inches of his face, he closed his eyes, awaiting the inevitable. There you go. That's a little bit of chapter 4. Little trip through the sewers. Like I said, of the night. Available on Amazon through Poe Boy Publishing. I'll get that right at one point. Poe Boy Publishing. Yeah. If you like it, go buy it. If you like what I'm doing, let me know. If you don't, let me know. Either way, I'll read it and reply. Yeah. So next time.